so that we don't keep you all too long. Welcome to Still Useful, a decade of sisterhood and poetry. It's extremely exciting for us to be gathered. My name is Fiona, and we're going to introduce all the readers along the way. So I'm not going to get into that right now. We have a process for how that's going to happen. But I'd just like to say that I notice that most of us, whilst waiting, have had kind of quite a massive grin on our faces. And I think that's because we're really excited to be doing this, and we're really grateful to you all for coming. So welcome and thank you. Our title comes from our story as a group of women poets who met just over 10 years ago on a life-changing intensive week of poetry tutored by the brilliant Marge Piercy in her hometown of Wellfleet, Cape Cod. We travelled from near and far to learn from this great poet. As you can probably tell by my accent, I wasn't local to Wellfleet. And we were all delighted to undertake any journey we could to learn from this poet whose work had inspired each of us in our activism, our lives as women, and in the craft of poetry. Since that time, 10 years ago, there have been between us 7 babies, 4 grandchildren, 5 books of poetry, multiple awards and nominations, groundbreaking work with poetry in prisons, in mental health, in schools, in universities, an exhibition of poetry embroidered on linen, and 1 podcast series. And those are just the things that I can remember off the top of my head. Despite the world changing some ways for the good, many ways for the worse, we have stayed connected through our feminism and our poetry and the force that Marge's tutoring gave us, the force of her inspiration. Since the pandemic, we've formed a more regular way to connect across the distance. And in fact, there's a couple of others of us who are close to us who couldn't make it today. It's the power of Zoom, which we've all come to love and hate in probably equal measure. But in this case, it's really been a reuniting force. And so we wanted to gather and read some poems old and new, and to invite you to experience them with us. We're going to start with a collective reading of one of our favourite poems of Marge Piercy, and then each of us will read a few poems of our own and pass the baton on by introducing the next reader and by reading one of her poems written from that time when we were together 10 years ago in Wellfleet. So I'm delighted that Laura is going to kick us off with this reading. Oh, no, it's not going to be Laura. It's going to be somebody else. It's going to start the collective reading of a poem.
To Be of Use by Marge Piercy. The people I love best jump into work head first without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight.
They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals, bouncing like half-submerged balls.
I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again.
I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out.
The work of the world is as common as mud.
Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust.
But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident.
Greek aphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used.
The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. And we got that out of the way. The first reader to not unmute will be the first reader. All right. So I'm going to introduce Ray Rose, and then I'm going to read her poem from 10 years ago. So Ray Rose earned her MFA from Goddard College. Her poems have been published in the Patterson Literary Review, Lilith Magazine, Cicadia Magazine, among others. Her book, Bipolar Disorder for Beginners, was published by Garden Oaks Press. She lives in Southern California with her husband and 2 daughters. And here's Ray's poem from a decade ago. The poets invade the town of Wellfleet. They fill every bed and breakfast. Their sandaled feet flick, flap up and down Holbrook Ave and up and down Commercial Street. Armed with pens, nightmares, triumphs, scars, they take over every table at the Lighthouse Restaurant, the bookstore restaurant, Max by the Pier. They demand oysters. They demand quahogs. Gliding into water, they soak their bodies in every pond. Herring Pond, Gull Pond, Higgins Pond, Long Pond, Great Pond. They steal the sound of the church bell, the sound of the bay, telling the water to move, 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 as they pocket shells and stones. They rattle reeds and marshes to watch birds take flight. They cram into every aisle of the library, ripping books off shelves. They demand paper. They demand ink. They fit into one room, elbow to elbow, chanting other poets' war cries. They stand, one by one, stating, "This is how it was. This is how it is. This is what I want." The poets invade the town of Wellfleet.
Thanks, Laura. Welcome to your revolution. I wrote you a poem for your revolution. I am unfurling your banners. I am shushing the audience. I am beginning. Welcome to your revolution. To the morning you have woken up with starlight in your hair. The morning you do not take waking up for granted. You whisper, aha, and thank you. Welcome to your revolution. You give up on ad campaigns and the kind of beauty they promise. You feed your belly what it needs, wear what feels good, trade in your shoe tree for redwoods. You stop hunting your flaws in the mirror and start searching for warblers and tree limbs, small, yellowish, brownish, grayish. Welcome to your revolution, where you love the people who love you back. You throw out fear like an old pair of scissors, worn out, rusty. Every time you try to use them, you just hurt your hands. On this day of your revolution, you say fear has got to go. And now, death can't win. Now everybody looks about the same. Now illness is a journey. Now you drop any weapon, face life with open hands. You do not fear loneliness or blindness because every poem you have ever read swirls around you like tufts of dandelion. Welcome to your revolution. You stop rattling off your past mistakes and start memorizing the planetary system. Beatles on vinyl. That is, on the day of your revolution, you step out of your old self like you step out of an old raincoat. You step out of that old way into your life. Welcome. Welcome to your revolution. 1. It is true I held the pink baby days old and imagined her dead, or at least gone, erased from my care. And when her heart raced every 14th beat, I was not worried and changed her diaper carefully not to disturb her heart monitor. I thought of how easy it would be to be rid of her and held her nostrils shut for just a moment. 2. It is true I hold the pink baby smiling with chubby cheeks, wide brown eyes studying me. I think of how easy it would be for that bomb in her chest to wipe her off the planet. It would decimate me. She wraps her tiny fingers around my fingers, rocks my hands back and forth like oars. For just a moment, we travel by sea. Amanda Oliver Hendricks is a Red Dirt Southern Belle, most recently published in Word Pieced, The Basil O'Flaherty, and the San Diego Poetry Annual. Hendricks has been privileged to have plays performed in her hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, as well as Nashville, Tennessee. These days, she most often writes poetry through her body, carving words on the hearts of her young sons the past 4 years. Hendricks' love for the outcast and story of healing from self-harm can be found in her blog Trail Mix, the sweet, salty, smooth, crunchy, and too much of life. This is her poem from 10 years ago. Scarlet was from England, Jezebel from Lowell, Mass. Big-mouthed women are not born in the South. I am not cold. I will continue to repeat this mantra as chill bumps rise against pale skin, as my nipples harden, tiny hairs stand up against inspiration and wind. I do melt quite often, dripping at times, watering the deadness of barren, shrinking, unrecognizable plants that have lost to winter. I do not overheat, perspiring down a frosted glass of lemonade, tea with lime. Magnolia scented pearls, perfectly placed against clavicle, clipped onto earlobes without air holes. I grew up afraid of being angry. Pretty Southern girls eat grits, do not bare their teeth. Take so much longer to learn to fight. I cover myself in every season. There will be no solace in the protection of clothes, and I am not cold. Keep repeating.
Thank you, Ray. One of the most special things about that week in Wellfleet was connecting with you and becoming friends. 10 years later, I am so very proud of you, friend. Magic City Blues. It is hot in Birmingham, city on fire. Scorching heat, like the man dangling a cigarette between his cracked lips while he weed whacks and NASCAR vrooms his zero-turn lawnmower around our yard. Has leaned too far over the gas can while he pours. Whoosh. Sweatier than a witch's wet cooter watering watermelons is July in Alabama. Our black and white house is on Main Street where the ghosts leave their homes in October. The snaggletooth meth wizards walk down where the sidewalk ends to the Butterbean Festival. Installed in the 40s, every time we use our oven, our home fills with the scent of candles labeled Sylvia Plath's Brunch and Sexton's Garage Sale. It brings hope some days. Others makes you obsessively concerned for the breaths your sons breathe. You think it would help us get better sleep. I don't really cook that much. Housewife degrees cost more than my student loan debt. And yet, Birmingham is magic again. At least that is what the headlines read before we boxed up our newlywed love for Tennessee. Food trucks, the downtown courthouse, lit rainbow for pride, and once segregated theaters now revived. Someone from Condé Nast's payroll visited 5 Points, South Side. The mayor has a hit playlist on Spotify. Art is crawling. Murals are Insta-worthy around gentrified corners. The projects have some color. Full backdrops on cement walls with no lines, just waiting. The mixed race family, local realty, business owners, strong members of the community, the word that should not be thought in silence, painted in hate across the creaking, swinging sign in their yard last week, 2019. People who believe all lives matter posted about it on Facebook. No one rallied for a dislike button to click. This poem is called It's a Beautiful Day, Mommy. A shower every few days will save your life, even if you can't stand long enough to run water through the S of your stretch marks. Jesus, you have learned to walk on slime. No time for clean tubs. Your body wants to collapse, but your mother's intuition is too stubborn to release. some muscles overprotecting a tailbone shattered into pieces after more than 12 hours of labor. Too exhausted to brush your teeth, you blame the draining mucus gifted by the Green Goblin 2-year-old for the rankness of breath. Praise the god of imagination, your son has recently fallen in fanboy with dragons. Tonight, he says there is a fire breather outside, puts a pudgy finger over his lips. It's asleep, he whispers. I pray. This tiny prophet cut from my insides, bloody and screaming, does indeed know how to keep dragons still, asleep, quiet. It's dark in here, he tells his daddy. Turn on the light. He doesn't know how to flip the switch alone. Some days, neither do I. My crotch smells like hamsters, I confess to my husband. He has long hair, again, has taken to wearing t-shirt scraps stained with coffee to push back unwashed, matted curls. He is now our savior. My gooch smells like buttered popcorn, he replies. These words alone are more true love than a misspelled tattoo or a full-price Whitman sampler purchased before Valentine's Day. He makes ice packs for my honey pot, refuses to look at the photo I managed to selfie of my situation, having seen my hot pocket explode into a large black hole live. Yes, my flower now flaps like Pop Pop's booty cheeks on a good old man fart day. But our love grew a new baby to hold, beautiful and squishy, who will be acne-ridden and potty-mouthed too fast, hopefully never knowing he was conceived on a night mommy was too tired and daddy afraid she would be mad if he put the condom on himself. The smell of baby spit up, sound of green pudding poops pouring into overpriced diapers are more than enough to keep communication deficits distant. I had the doctor sew my skin and sinew wrapped together in the shape of letters. L-O-V-E. It is why he's so strong. Why I have to pee 4 times standing over the drain during a 30-minute shower. It is my amazing honor to introduce Andrea Witzke-Slott. Andrea is author of the poetry collections To Find a New Beauty, Golden Wake Press 2012, and The Ministry of Flowers, Valley Press UK 2020. Her fiction has won prizes with Able Muse and Fiction International. Recent poetry and stories can be found in such places as Stand Magazine, American Literary Review, Fictive Dream, Acumen and Ambit. After teaching for many years, primary school in the UK, community college in Texas, and after earning her PhD at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Andrea now lives in London, where she works daily with words, paints, plays piano, and does photography. This is her poem from 10 years ago. The Nightlight, a Lullaby. On the edge of night, I spy you through my telescope. I see you drifting out to sea, your small boat trapped in waves of wakefulness that pull your boat farther and farther from shore. You sit inside your little boat, looking down at a book by a bedside lamp that shines like the moon, a bedside lamp that rests beside a bed, a bedside lamp that becomes the moon, that sits beside you inside your rocking boat. I call to you from a freight liner that pulls through the deadliest storms without the slightest sway of a bow. I think I call to you. I put down your book, I say, Pick up the oars, I say. You cannot hear. I begin to yell. I'm sure I'm yelling. Then jump ship, just swim over here. A life vest is waiting. No, then I will float near you. I will scoop you up. Just lift your hands to me. Just reach up here. Flop on board my waiting decks. Smooth yourself on the shores of my liner. You don't look up. My seas are too calm, you seem to say, yet I will not rest. I will continue my watch. Through the mist, I will watch. Through my portholes, I will watch. From my lee side waters, I will watch. I will watch port side. I will watch starboard. I will watch you reading by a lamp, a bedside lamp that looks like a globe that looks like the moon, a moon that hides its switch, a moon that gives you permission, neat and full consent, to jump ship, to swim with the whales, to swim to land's end itself, where the world can be snapped off, the ocean snapped shut, the waves snuffed out with just one pull of just one switch.
Thank you, Amanda. And it was so nice hearing Ray's poems and Amanda's poems. And I feel honored to be amongst all of you tonight. I am going to read two poems from the newer collection. The first one is called Llama, Llama Gloma. And in fact, the final lines do speak to Marge Piercy's poems in many ways. In fact, much of what's in this poem speaks to Marge Piercy and what she taught all of us. Llama, Llama Gloma. The epigraph is this: llamas are willing pack animals, but only to a point. An overloaded llama will simply refuse to move. These animals often lie down on the ground, and they may spit, hiss, or even kick at their owners until their burden is lessened. That's from the National Geographic. Llama. Flat-headed, not quite camel of a beast, with your frog eyes sitting up high, why do you stare at me tete-a-tete with your watery, floating ostrich neck? You are one giant thumb-like projection, a chest-swallowed head that marries your insect legs in one fell swoop. And still, all that powder puff fluff of puffer fish pride. People think, how can you be so vain? How can you be so sure? Who made you think you own the place? I know better. You were not born knowing that queenship is your fate. You are so much more than a rope or rug, pack collar or pile of dung, as handy as it is for fires. You are the shyness no one can see, the awkwardness no one realizes. I know the feeling. Refusing to move if a burden is too heavy, spitting if you feel you've been wronged, hissing if never allowed to hum your strange tunes, much less take a moment's rest. Llama, dear Llama, teach me to wear my eyes on top of my head, where the spit in my mouth, lift a little pride onto my brittle back, and learn how to give, even in death, a little something of use. The second poem I'll read is called To My Daughter Who Came Into My Bedroom Last Night. To my daughter who came into my bedroom last night and said, thank you for trusting me. Mothers around the globe sat up in bed and stared at the already closed door. The mother I was turned to gaze at me, catching my eye in the corner mirror, the mirrored mother nose. She too sees the long, slow hillside in the darkened room, the hillside I've been climbing in Sisyphus fashion for years, every cliche in the annals of womanhood, parenthood, personhood. But now, with such few words, I find myself uncorking a daughter's refrain and pouring out an imagined afternoon into my dark room, where I rest in the imagined grass, the shadow of the imagined mountains at our backs. And once again, I see her curls, leaden with light, and listen to her adagio hymns as they set new seasons in motion. Relax as she toddles to an imagined corner of an imagined garden where I can no longer see her face, where she investigates bugs and leaves the way she now investigates boys, girls. And while the summer skies still spell night and the days lie in wait, let us remain here with the night's cool breeze at our backs, where she again is my string-bean daughter, and I am the gardener who never had a green thumb, but who finally learned when to stop watering. Next up is Chelsea Krieg. I'm delighted to introduce you to Chelsea and her work. Chelsea Krieg was raised in southeastern Virginia. She received an MFA in poetry from North Carolina State University. Her work is forthcoming in the Southern Poetry Anthology 9, Virginia. And I'm happy to say that she's actually reading 2 poems that are in that forthcoming anthology. And her work can also be found in Tinderbox Poetry Journal, Greensboro Review, Poet Lore, and Bellevue Literary Review, and elsewhere. She lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and teaches writing at North Carolina State University. For more information, you can visit her website, and we'll be giving you all the details to the websites. You will definitely want to look up the work of Chelsea through her website and all the other poets too. I'm going to read her poem from 10 years ago. It's called Love Letter to the River Ouse, March 28th, 1941. And just a quick note on the poem, the River Ouse is where Virginia Woolf drowned. And so it's a persona poem for her. Love Letter to the River Ouse, March 28th, 1941. No, 2 people could have been happier than we have been. A final offering to my husband scrawled by my sure hand. Each letter still arches in maddening dissonance, while your sweet tributary lips are my only true solace. Each stone I made, and each urges my slip down into the cool and peaceful room beneath where we are both more than we seem on the surface. I am composed, and you lay impishly, mouthing my ankles and knees until I release to your touch a true consummation and final chance at bliss to die tenderly by your forgiving kiss. Now over to Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I'm just very happy to be reading again with all of these writers. I was a sort of floundering, recently graduated undergrad when I went to the workshop with Marge Piercy, and this whole week was just really transformative for my confidence. And I am very honored to be with such incredible writers today. So thank you. This first poem is called Portrait of My Husband as the Owl of Minerva Takes Flight in the Dusk, which is an ekphrastic poem based off of an art installation by Stefan Dahm. It's a wonder cabinet collection of blown glass. When we married, you opened the cabinet of your body to me, and I placed all I did not understand on the shelves of your ribs. The bullet that killed my uncle, my mother's cancer, the way the body destroys itself from inside. I arranged it all there beside each specimen of your own, the bottles I had not yet come to know. And you trembled open, glass gleaming in the dark as I reached my hand inside. Every night since, I have taken the bottles out, held them to the light, questioned the way each specimen floats, swims in midair. I've spent hours considering the hue and curve of each of those creatures, examined every cross-section, noted which is more flower, which more sea anemone. Everything with a wing I touched, pinned those translucent sleeves so they glistened, each body a separate yearning. Every night that passes, I observe, trace the glass with the tips of my fingers, name them all with the swells of my palms. So today, when the surgeon pries open the oak of your chest and cuts them from their shelves, I know he does not know how to hold them. How could he? I want to tell him, look at this one. I want to tell him, I can tell you its name. Postpartum as corpse flower. It's like this. In the rainforest, the corpse flower grows tall, caresses the boughs of the acacia, lifts her wine-dark skirt to flaunt golden garter blossoms beneath. 7 years of waiting, then for 2 nights she burns with fever. Midnight air heavy with rot as carrion beetles and sweat bees flock, tapping, humming until pollen dusted they flee. And all, for a moment, is quiet. 9 months after, breasts swollen, heavy fruit, t-shirt damp with milk. We have been at this all night. Drink, baby, please. Hair unwashed, a tiny hungry mouth, crying, 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 lips circling her nipple in the dark. Birth guzzle. For 9 months, I grow a girl made almost entirely of water. Know the wave of her body in my belly's dark water. I was wrong when I thought rushing, collapse, dam breaking to give way to her water. Instead, my body held until a midwife burst her room of strange water. No need for concern, all normal. Moon thighs pulled tides of my womb's brine, salt water. Before my daughter came, they said it would feel like fire, but Chelsea, how long can you scream underwater? And it is my pleasure to introduce Eve Lyons. Eve Lyons is a poet and fiction writer living in the Boston area. Her work has appeared in Lilith, Literary Mama, Hip Mama, Mother Magazine, Word Riot, Dead Mule of Southern Literature, as well as other magazines and several anthologies. Her first book of poetry, Newnam, Repairing the World, was published in May of 2020 by WordTech Communications. She works as an expressive arts therapist at an outpatient mental health clinic and teaches at Lesley University. And it is my pleasure to read Eve Lyons' poem, Rules of the Road, from 10 years ago. Rules of the Road. And I should also say this poem appears in Newnam. Rules of the Road. Biking while adjusting your sunglasses is an excellent way to go over your handlebars. In Portland, Oregon, light rail tracks are not your friend. Drinking while biking is a lot like drinking while driving, except without the protective metal cage around you. Bike lanes in some cities are a fabulous idea. The one-time separate but equal really works. But in Boston, Massachusetts, they're just fancy painted parking lanes. The ghosts of millions of Black people slapped their heads and said, "We told you this wouldn't work." Biking is a means to an end. Biking is a way to move your fat ass. In San Antonio, Texas, the only buses go from one mall to the other mall. All your friends live on the other side of the freeway. Biking is solitude. Biking is freedom. When you're learning to ride, it's best if you have a father who picks you up off the grass when you fall, who holds the back of your seat while you're learning to stay up without the training wheels. Then let's go when you're not looking, and before you know it, you're on your own.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you. And one of the things that occurred to me listening to the poets who've already read before me is that you can probably tell, but as Fiona said in the opening, several of us have had children since we first met, and I feel like you can kind of tell where our children are chronologically, developmentally by the poetry. So if you haven't sort of been picking up with that as I am, this is the therapist in me, I guess, right? My child is somewhere between Chelsea, Ray, and Amanda's, but not quite as old and mature as Andrea's. And in fact, Andrea, it occurred to me that I am still learning to stop watering. I feel like I'm learning that from you and so many people. The first two poems that I read are part of what I hope to maybe publish as a collection someday, pairs of poems that juxtapose my experience as a therapist with my experience as a mother. So, accompanying an 11-year-old to the Mormon steakhouse. The man they called father, either by profession or by relation, leaned in and said seriously, "Everybody changes every day, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad." I watched 11-year-old Ernest dancing with a girl in high school. Later that evening, stealing his mom away from her new husband. We hope this one will be okay. I dropped Ernest off back at the treatment center before heading home to my own apartment. Ernest left a balloon from the wedding in a room of a friend who doesn't have a family to visit or a home. Realizing the sanctity of what you have by visiting other homes. After all Ernest has been through, after all that he has seen, a still small gesture in a terrible world. Luck be damned. When we play sequence or sorry, it's so important to teach my son about luck. Unlike his classmates and certain political leaders, he's already pretty good at accepting the inevitability of loss. On the other hand, how do you explain why his white classmates can be rowdy and wild in a way that he cannot? The danger is believing you're less deserving. How do you explain why we have a nice home, a car, money in the bank, food on the table, why when we walk by panhandlers with cardboard signs, there's some kinds of luck that aren't fair. The danger is believing you're more deserving. And for my next, I'm gonna read two more poems. These are also in the collection. This one is called Where Connection is Possible. And for this, apparently I need to take off my glasses. Okay, middle age. Where connection is possible. In the years before my nose ring and green hair, but sometime after becoming a vegetarian, I stood before my temple, declared that God was in between all of us, in the space where connection is possible. What then is prayer if God is possibility but fragile, easily lost or even squashed? Prayer is an invocation, a call to arms, a beckoning, a reckoning, a summoning others to gather round. Prayer is a protest march, a knitting circle, a writing group, a poetry slam. Prayer is not the end or even the goal. Prayer is how we survive until we get there. And the last poem I'm going to read also references some of the themes that the poets have talked about here about our connection in Wellfleet. This is called This Has to Be Enough. I asked them what they have faith in, this group of women who have lived through abusive fathers, old school Catholic school teachers, bad boyfriends, plus a little heroin addiction on the side. One of them says numbers. One of them talks of God. One of them cites comfort in the changing of the seasons. The one thing they can all agree on is their faith in each other, in this process, in their own ability to connect with one another, to come here once a week and laugh, in a world where oil gushes in the Gulf of Mexico, while politicians talk about the need to pray, in a world where terrorists could be lurking at any airport gate or subway turnstile. This has to be good enough. I come back from a week in Wellfleet, startled by my own ability to find community so easily, so quickly. Living in the city has a way of hardening me. A thick crust begins to form outside my skin, protecting my vulnerable innards. I am ready to peel it off, leave it exposed a while. So it is now my absolute delight to introduce Fiona Bennett, who the randomness of the collection of poets that came together. We were actually Marge Piercy's inaugural juried poetry workshop, and that we came from England and from Switzerland and from Alabama and from Georgia and from Oregon is remarkable to me. And anyway, so Fiona Bennett is a writer and a director. She is the founder of the award-winning project and podcast, The Poetry Exchange. Poems have appeared in journals in the UK and the USA and on BBC's Radio 3, The Verb, and commended in competitions, including the Bridport Prize. She recently curated and directed the poetry of Adrienne Rich as part of a new ballet for Ballet Black. The Light You Left Behind, after Marge Piercy's intensive workshop, Wellfleet, June 2010. It's over, and I'm standing on the porch staring out into the thick darkness, slowly forming above the lake, the curve of the shore whose intricacies I traced only minutes ago. The woods with a face full of expressions that held my gaze in the long afternoon, these companions, like your presence, slowly extinguishing, long shot, fade to black. I breathe in, willing my eyes to hold onto things, and in that instant, a tiny orange light, like a single ash blown from the fire, pierces the dense night. I blink, it winks, then again, then another, and another, and another. I begin to count, I lose count. They flash like your small, bright miracles of thought, my first fireflies. Children here catch them in jam jars. The field guide says they are excess oxygen stimulated, according to science, by the need to reproduce. The light you give cannot be caught in a jam jar or put down to procreation, but it will cause wonder. It will ignite change. Where I come from, there are no fireflies. Send me your words. Send me your flame.
Thank you so much, Eve, and everybody. It's a sort of extraordinary experience for us. I hope it's going down well for all of you. It's kind of like a flashback and a kind of fast forward and a kind of kaleidoscope of time. So, but it's just so beautiful to hear everybody's voice that I remember so well from sitting around the table with Marge, and to just hear the voices and the poems. Thank you, Eve. That was lovely. The first poem that I'm going to read is inspired by the true story of the people of Daraa in Syria, who, whilst under siege and facing brutal bombing from the Assad regime, rescued books from bombed houses and created a secret library inside a bomb shelter. It's an incredible story, and we'll send a link that gives more information. But whilst they were trying to defend their homes and their cities, they sustained themselves with reading, including freedom fighters who took books with them onto the front line. There's an epigraph in the poem, which is from William Wordsworth's The Prelude. So I'm going to read that first and then the poem. And the quote from Wordsworth is, "But as a pilgrim resolute, I took, even with the chance equipment of that hour, the road that pointed toward the chosen vale." The Secret Library, Daraa, Syria, 2016. From his post on the edge of what's left of his city, among rubble, hoops of barbed wire and burnt out cars, he watches through his father's old binoculars for black marks on a dirt grey sky. All clear, he puts his rifle down, takes up the small solid block of a leather-bound book. One ear remains on duty, as foreign syllables swim up from the page, then cluster into shapes his mouth closes round like cherries. Home, pomp, stone. Then the strange musical ones he loves the most. Empyrean, dedication, magnificent. The old idea comes back to him, nudges at the edge of who he once was. Pilgrimage, the right to travel out in search of something holy, and to return to the sanctity of home. And I'm going to just read one other, which is a bit of a gear change. So I want to read this poem in celebration and honor of the my grandmother and my three great aunts. And this is my mother's mother and her sisters, and my mum is in the audience now, so I'm giving this a special one for her. And these four women were extraordinary individuals. I had the great pleasure of meeting them briefly. And they were also a very powerful sisterhood. And as I read this poem, I'm going to share a picture of them, which is what kind of inspired the poem, and in particular discovering the date of the picture that was taken being 1960. So this is Ladies' Day, Beeston Fields Golf Club, 1960. They are on the lawn outside the clubhouse. Four sisters, arms linked at the waist. Their skirts hover just below their knees. It is after the corset and before the mini. They are daring. They are middle-aged. They are trim in their outfits, but not petite. Four sisters, each dashing the same smile back at the cameraman's wise crack. It is after the vote, but before the pill. Their jaws are steady. Their eyes are steel. They are smart in their dress, smart in their heads. Four women, standing tall in the gap between two eras. The next day, the caption in the Post will proclaim, after the match and before the dinner, the Campbell sisters, each one of them a winner. Indeed, they were in many, many ways. Great. I'm really delighted, honoured and full of joyful memories, and also of the joy of being reconnected to Jennifer Saunders. To introduce Jennifer. Jennifer Saunders is the author of Self-Portrait and Housewife and a Pushcart Best of the Net and a Horizon Anthology nominee. Her work has appeared in the Georgia Review, Grist, Ninth Letter, The Shallow Ends and elsewhere. Jennifer holds an MFA from Pacific University and lives in German-speaking Switzerland, where in the winters she teaches skating in a hockey school and drives her hockey-playing children to many, many ice rinks. And I'm going to read Jennifer's poem from 10 years ago, from our time together in Wellfleet, and it's entitled, Until I Do Not. Until I do not. I walk past the park where you do not play, and I do not toss stones in the shallow pond, laughing as the ripples run outward to stir the leaves on the surface. I glance away from the school you do not attend and where you do not skip across the hopscotch patch, shrieking with the girls when the boys steal your stones from the squares. I do not hold your hand or braid your hair or know the colour of your eyes. And I am happy most days until I do not kiss your cheek and half catch the whirl of your ear and a strand of your hair with my lips. Then this hand that I do not hold pulls me to the park where you do not play and where I wonder again over the color of your eyes.
Thank you, Fiona, for that beautiful reading. You read my work better than I do. I should just hire you to read all my poems. You can do it all for me. Thank you. The moment in which you are surprised. It is winter in the Swiss Alps, and the north wind snaps the flag like a dish towel, unravels clouds like skeins of yarn. There is a frozen pond, old-style hockey rink, bordered by impossible peaks that carve the high blue sky. Your son's shadow is long across the ice, an unexpected glimpse of the man he'll grow into, should he be granted the days. A fine powder of snow swirls on the surface, covering the curving lines from his skates and the skittering tracks of a rabbit. And the day is fine the way only a day in the mountains can be fine. And can you imagine, after all this time, it surprises you, the high sky, the sheep wool clouds, the granite peaks, your son growing as long as his shadow, the days you have been granted. Crosswalk. I have always wanted to be the woman who slips into a coat room with a stranger. I have always wanted to be the stranger. Woman in the closet, woman upstairs, woman in the back of your car. Every woman I know learned to try to kick out a taillight if she's locked in the trunk, to walk darkened streets with her keys lacing her hand. So much cramped darkness when what I want is a penthouse, a wall of windows, the tempered grace of forgetting to watch my step. Tell me how to lay me down without counting the flights to the ground. I can see the whole city from up here, the taxis and the takeouts, the last call stragglers tumbling out of the bars. City of angels, city of strangers, city of text me when you make it home. City of her body was found in the park. I want to love your roses, your 7 bridges. I want to love my name in your mouth. I've striped my body white on white. I'm holding up my hand. Your streets are full of tents and sleeping bags. Your bridges call my name. From up here, traffic moves so smoothly, and the stars are farther away than ever. And this next poem is from a project that I'm working on about a maid who lived in Switzerland in the 1780s. So this is a bit of a persona poem about the poor maid in Switzerland. Anna's to-do list, morning. Not on paper, but in the body, trained to rise before rook or rooster. Rinsing in water carried the night before and bearing midnight's weather. The sound of piss hitting the pot. Dressing in the dark, cold fingers nimble through buttonholes. A maid learns to be tidy by sun or by shadow. The stench of night soil seeping through the lid, down the stairs in the dark, emptying the pot in the dark. Blaze the kitchen fire to warm water for the Frau. She does it half asleep, rote of wick and candle. Boiling a brew of coffee for the hair. Through the house, like a spirit, cups and saucers materialize in her wake. The curtains seem to flutter, but she's already gone. And our next reader is Katherine Perry. I am delighted to introduce Katherine. Katherine Perry's first book of poetry, Long Alabama Summer, was published in 2017. Other poems can be found in journals such as Poetry Quarterly, Southern Women's Review, Women's Studies, and 13th Moon. She teaches poetry and writing and is a co-founder of the Georgia State University Prison Education Project, which brings college courses to incarcerated students in Georgia prisons. She lives in Decatur, Georgia, with her spouse and 2 children, and identifies as a Southern poet, even when that label is complicated. And I will be reading Katherine's Wellfleet poem from 10 years ago, which is titled Unload, and it's for Charles. unload, the dishwasher, and every plate is a metaphor. I remember which sink in which town gave me that chip or crack, the tiny glass cup from my great aunt given before she died when she was cleaning out her cabinets, a perfect size for dipping sauces, the pasta bowls from your sister that are an easy shape for black beans with cheese, forks we stood in the aisles and compared with every other box set. We never used the silver from our wedding gifts. I admire the cups that have made all 14 of our moves with us, the ones we used in college before we were too snooty for Tupperware and all things plastic. And I stack those right beside the new metal bottles that make us feel somehow earth-friendly. When I put away the cake pan, the one I found for your birthday cake, I place it more gently than needed for a metal frame. It has held, after all the silly sugar metaphors of one person's attempt to please another. And I'm turning it over to Katherine now.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm just going to read two poems. And the first poem is called Magnolia Springs, Alabama, and Barefoot. Magnolia Springs is where my parents both grew up. And the little store that I mentioned here was the one general store in town. And it was the first place I was allowed to go in by myself and buy candy. Magnolia Springs, Alabama, and Barefoot. My wide, sturdy feet, dusted, thump the ground like a thumb across drum flesh, a thick snap of my 75 pounds pushing into the sandy bronze earth as I run from pretty mamas around the garden, the scuppernong vine, down the path in front of David's trailer, under the clothesline, between the pump house and the little house where my mother was raised. I passed the church with a tall white steeple, trying to move out of here as fast as I am. On the other side of the paved highway, there is a spring and ponding coal where hippies smoke pot and swing out on a long rope and drop their thin, shirtless bodies into the cool water like silver minnows diving down. But I don't cross over. Instead, I hold my quarter between thumb and peace fingers, letting it get warm while I decide which candies to take home today. Ring pop, caramel singles, or chocolate mint. I always did this without shoes, only regretting that choice when I crossed the walkway into Moore's store, the heat pushing my blistering feet up and away. Back then, most paths were dirt, and my feet were enough to carry me. And the second poem is February on the Heart Holiday. And I did write this last February, not a month ago, which was February of 2020, where we knew COVID was coming, but it wasn't quite here yet in the US. February on the Heart Holiday. In almost spring, after a drowning wet winter, after flash floods ripped trees from soil and soil from the riverbeds, after water that washed away roadways finally controlled the Australian wildfires, the daffodils are opening their delicate white and yellow petals to a timid sun. I'm nervous for them, for the bravery that tonight's frosty evening might destroy, and for the azaleas and angel trumpets that have been fooled into believing that it is safe to return, that there will be bees to pollinate. Heartbreak is pervasive these days, and often teaches us by raising us down to our roots. Most every spring of my autumn cycle, I have been struggling tendrils, but we must continue to reach for those warmer rays like the ones in the blue topaz sky today. For every monarch left still needs to eat, an everyday lily, perhaps only seen once, offers up to my weeping eyes its place on planet Earth. And now it's my honor to introduce to you Laura Gail Grohe. Laura Gail Grohe's work appears in journals such as Patterson Review, and it has been used in public rituals by the Green Mountain Druid Order and in church services. Her exhibit, The Linens Project, is a collection of antique linens with Laura Gail's poetry hand embroidered on them. She's thrilled to be reading with her favorite poets today. And I get to read her poem from 10 years ago called Tonight is Not That Night. Tonight is not that night. There will be a night when one of us will grieve that the other is not here to touch, to smell, to love. But tonight is not that night. There is no hole in my life where you once lived. Instead, you are in our bed, fighting with sleep. Exhaustion slowly leaches anger from me, and I enter our bedroom where I drop my day's frustration to the floor with my jeans and t-shirt. I crawl beneath the covers and cup myself around you. The aroma of cigars and axle grease waft from your skin, and I gulp down a growl of anger. Were you covered by a tomb rather than these soft sheets, I would crave the smell of your skin, nasty or not. The same way you would miss my muddy toes trying to climb into bed with you. If those toes were under the ground, I suspect you would tell God that you would let me climb into bed with crushed grass and mud still clinging to my damp skin, if you could have just one more night with me. But tonight is not that night. So we rage in these deep days of summer. I sulk when you smell of cigars. You bar my way to the bed when my feet are not yet bathed in soft pink. And we rejoice that tonight is not that night.
Thank you, Katherine. The last 2 years of my father's life, I got to be his primary person and really discover how much I had actually learned from him. And I wrote this for him after he died. My father's gift. To create magic, you must learn to hold your mind and hands open for the unexpected. You must be prepared to welcome the guest who arrives in the moments just before dawn, as troublesome and inconvenient as she is delightful, with muddy feet and starlight in her eyes. And you must do this every single day, especially when you do not want to, so that when you leave this earth, the path trailing behind you will be bright, lit by dreams made real. And my second poem, and the last poem that we're doing today, was actually inspired after I read part of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's Poetry as Insurgent Art. This is Poet's Dispatch. Wake up. This is a newsflash from your local poet. There is no revolution. Evolution is dead. No speeches, no rallies, no soldiers with guns, no torture. Wake up. You have been told that silent streets are peaceful streets. This is a lie. In the past, uprisings were violent. Walls displayed rusty red sprays of gore. Communal graves replaced communal meals. But songs brought bullets to ground. Music mixing with blood in the streets brought tyrants to ground as well. Wake up. What doctor-approved state-provided pills cure your dis-ease? Treat the human condition as illness, emotions as pathology. Why break an artist's fingers when pills so easily break the drive to create? Wake up. You sleep the deep, hollow sleep of sedation. I am whispering to you as you hide in your bed. It is time. to sleep without dreams, to live without dreams, to die without dreams. This is the new way. Wake up, rise, and rage. This is your life.
Yeah, thanks so much for that final poem, Laura, and thanks to all of you for being with us. Just thank you so much. It's amazing to have so many people here. It's incredible to have you with us. We're going to stay on for 10 minutes or so, and I think Eve's going to try and organise a way of doing a Q&A if anybody has time for that. But equally, we're over a little bit over, I think, so an hour. So if you do have to go, please do. We're going to email you with some links of how to find out more about everybody's work if you want to, and to explore their books and their websites. But